Chapter 6. I spent a lot of time that summer at Herman W. Block Memorial Library. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library sounds like it would be a big fancy place, but it's not. It's just a little old house full of books. Miss Franny Block is in charge of them all. She is very small and she is a very old woman with short gray hair, and she was the first friend I made in Naomi. It all started with Winn-Dixie not liking it when I went to the library because he couldn't go inside. But I showed him how he could stand up on his hind legs and he could look in the window and see me in there selecting my books. And he was okay as long as he could see me. But the thing was, the first time Miss Franny Block saw Winn-Dixie standing on his hind legs like that and looking in the window, she didn't think it was a dog. She thought it was a bear. This is what happened. I was picking out my books, kind of humming to myself, and all of a sudden, there was this loud, scary scream. And I went run to the front of the library, and there was Miss Franny Block, sitting there on the floor behind the desk. "Miss Franny," I said, "are you all right?" "A bear," she said. "A bear?" I asked. "He's come back," she said. "He has?" I asked. "Where is he?" "Out there," she said, and she raised her finger and she pointed right at Winn-Dixie, standing up on his hind legs looking in the window for me. "Miss Franny Block," I said, "that's not a bear. That's a dog. That's my dog, Winn-Dixie." "Are you positive?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "I'm positive. He's my dog. I would know him anywhere." So Miss Franny sat there trembling and shaking. "Come on," I said, "let me help you up. It's okay." So I stuck my hand out and I helped Miss Franny Block. When she took a hold of it and I pulled her up off the floor, she didn't weigh hardly anything at all. Once she was standing there on her feet, she started acting all embarrassed, saying I must think she was a silly old lady mistaking a dog for a bear, but that she had had a bad experience with a bear coming to the Herman W. Block Memorial Library a long time ago, and she never had quite gotten over it. "Well, when did this happen?" I asked her. "Well," said Miss Franny Block, "it's a very long story." "That's okay," I told her. "I'm like my mama, and I like to be told stories, too. But before you start telling, can Winn-Dixie come in and listen, too? He gets lonely without me." "Well, I don't know," said Miss Franny. "Dogs aren't allowed in the Herman W. Block Memorial Library." "He'll be good," I told her. "He's a dog who goes to church." And before she could say yes or no, I went outside and I got Winn-Dixie and I brought him in, and he laid down with a whoomph and a sigh right at Miss Franny's feet. She looked down at him and said, "He's most certainly a large dog." "Well, yes, ma'am," I told her. "He has a large heart, too." "Well," said Miss Franny, and she bent over and gave Winn-Dixie a pat on the head. And Winn-Dixie wagged his tail back and forth and snuffled his nose on her little old lady feet. "Let me get a chair and sit down so I can tell this story properly." Chapter 7. Back when Florida was wild, consisted of nothing but palmetto trees and mosquitoes so big that they could fly away with you, said Miss Franny. "And I was just a little girl, no bigger than you. My father, Herman W. Block, told me that I could have anything I wanted for my birthday, anything at all." Miss Franny looked around the library. She leaned in close to me. "I don't want to appear prideful," she said, "but my daddy, he was a very rich man, a very, very rich man." She nodded and then leaned back and said, "And I was a little girl who loved to read, so I told my daddy, 'Daddy, I would most certainly love to have a library for my birthday. A small little library would be wonderful.'" "You asked for a whole library?" "A small one," Miss Franny nodded. "And I want a little house full of nothing but books. And I wanted to share them, too, and I got my wish. My father built me this house, and the very one we're sitting in right now, and I was at a very young age. I became a librarian. Yes, ma'am." "What about the bear?" I said. "Did I mention Florida was wild in those days?" Miss Franny Block said. "Uh-huh, you did. It was wild, and there were wild men and wild animals and wild women. Like bears?" "Yes, ma'am." "That's right. Now, I have to tell you, I was a little Miss Know-it-all and a little Miss Smarty-Pants with my library full of books. Oh, yes, ma'am, I thought I knew all the answers to everything. Well, one hot Thursday, I was sitting in my library with all my books, and the windows were open, and my nose was stuck in a book, and a shadow crossed my desk. And without looking up, yes, ma'am, without even looking up at all, I said, "Is there a book I can help you find?" Well, there was no answer. And I thought it might have been a wild man or a wild woman, scared of all these books and afraid to speak up. But then I became aware of a very peculiar smell, a strong smell. And I raised my eyebrows slowly and my eyes slowly, and then standing in front of me was a bear. Yes, ma'am, a very large bear. "How big?" I asked. "Oh, well," said Miss Franny, "perhaps 3 times the size of your dog." "Then what happened?" I asked her. "Well," Miss Franny said, "I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he put out his big nose up in the air, and he sniffed, like he was trying to decide if little Miss Know-It-all Librarian is what he wanted to eat that day." And I sat there, and I thought, well, if this bear intends to eat me, I am not going to let it happen without a fight. No, ma'am. So I very slowly and carefully, I raised the book I was reading. "Well, what book was that?" I asked. "Why, it was War and Peace, a very large book." I raised it up slowly, and then I aimed it carefully, and I threw it right at that bear and screamed, "Begone!" And you know what? "No, ma'am," I said. "What?" "He went, but this is what I will never forget. He took that book with him." "Nuh-uh," I said. "Yes, ma'am," said Miss Franny. "He snatched it and ran." "Did he ever come back?" I asked. "No, I never saw him again." Well, the men in town used to tease me about it. They used to say, "Miss Franny, we saw that bear of yours out in the woods today, and he was reading that book, and he said it sure was good. And would it be all right if he kept just another week?" "Yes, ma'am," they did tease me about it. She sighed. "I imagine I'm the only one left from those days. I imagine I'm the only one who even recalls that bear. All my friends, everyone I know when I was young, they're all dead and gone." She sighed again. She looked at me with sad, old, wrinkled. It was the same way I felt sometimes, being friendless in a new town and not having any mama to comfort me. So I sighed with her, too. Winn-Dixie raised his head off his paws, looked back and forth between me and Miss Franny, and he sat up, and then he showed Miss Franny his teeth. "Well, now look at that," she said. "That dog is smiling at me." "It's a talent of his," I told her. "It's a fine talent," Miss Franny said. "A very fine talent." And she smiled back at Winn-Dixie. "We could be friends," I said to Miss Franny. "I mean, you and me and Winn-Dixie. We could all be friends." Miss Franny smiled even bigger. "Why, that would be so grand," she said. "Just grand." And right at that minute, right there, the 3 of us decided to be friends. Who should come marching into the Herman W. Black Memorial but pinchy-faced Amanda Wilkinson. She walked right up to the Miss Franny's desk and said, "I finished Johnny Tremain, and I enjoyed it very much. I would like something even more difficult to read now because I'm an advanced reader." "Yes, dear, I know," said Miss Franny, and she got up out of her chair. Amanda pretended like I wasn't even there. She stared right past me. "Are dogs allowed in this library?" she asked Miss Franny as they walked away. "Certain ones. Yes, certain ones are," said Miss Franny. "A select few." And then she turned around and winked at me. I smiled back. I had just made my first friend in Naomi, and nobody was going to mess that up for me, not even old pinchy-faced Amanda Wilkinson. Chapter 8. Winn-Dixie's bald spots started to grow fur, and the fur that he had to begin with was starting to look shiny and healthy. He didn't limp anymore, and you could tell that he was proud of looking so good, proud of not looking like a stray. I thought that he might need most was a collar, so I went into Gertrude's Pets. There were fish and snakes and mice and lizards and gerbils and pet supplies, and I found a real handsome leather collar with matching leash. Winn-Dixie was not allowed to come inside. There was a big sign that said, "No dogs allowed." So I held on to the collar up by the window. And Winn-Dixie, who was standing there on the other side of the window, pulled up his lips and showed his teeth at me and sneezed and wagged his tail. Something furious. So I knew he absolutely loved that leash and collar combination. But it was very expensive. I decided to explain my situation to the man behind the counter. I said, "I don't get a big enough allowance to afford something this fancy, but I love this collar and this leash, and so does my dog. And I was thinking that maybe you could set me up on an installment plan." "Installment plan," said the man. Gertrude! Somebody screamed in a real irritating voice. I looked around. It was a parrot. She was sitting on top of the fish tanks looking right at me. An installment plan, I said, ignoring the parrot. You know, I promised to give you my allowance every week, and you give me the leash and a collar now. I don't think I can do that. He shook his head. No, the owner wouldn't like that. He looked down at the counter. He wouldn't even look at me. He had thick black hair. He was slicked back like Elvis Presley. He had a name tag that said Otis. Or I could work for you, I said. I could come in and sweep the floor and dust the shelves and take out the trash, and I could do stuff like that for you. I looked around at Gertrude's Pets. There was sand, sunflower shells, and big dust bunnies all over the floor. I could tell it needed to be swept. Said Otis, and he looked down at the counter some more. Gertrude! The parrot screamed again. I'm real trustworthy, I said. I'm new in town, but my daddy is a preacher. He's a preacher at the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi, and I'm real honest. But the thing is Winn-Dixie, my dog, he would have to come inside with me because if we get separated for too long, he starts to howl. Something terrible. Gertrude doesn't like dogs, said Otis. Is she the owner? I asked. Yes, well, he finally looked up and he pointed at the fish tanks. That Gertrude, the parrot. I named her after the owner. Gertrude is a pretty bird, screamed Gertrude. She might like Winn-Dixie, I told Otis. Almost everybody does. Maybe I could come inside and meet her. And if the two of them get along, then maybe I could have the job. Maybe, Otis mumbled. He looked down at the counter again. So I opened the door, and I let Winn-Dixie come in, trotting inside the store. Dog! Screamed Gertrude. I know it, Otis told her. And then Gertrude got real quiet. And she sat on the top of the fish tank. She cocked her head from one end of the side to the other and looking at Winn-Dixie. And Winn-Dixie stood and stared back at her. He didn't hardly move. He didn't even wag his tail. He didn't smile. He didn't sneeze. He just stared at Gertrude. And she stared at him. And then she spread her wings out real far and flew and landed right on top of Winn-Dixie's head. Dog, she croaked. Winn-Dixie wagged his tail a little tiny bit. And Otis said, you can start on Monday. Thank you, I told him. You won't be sorry. On the way out of Gertrude's Pets, I said to Winn-Dixie, you are better at making friends than anybody I've ever known. I bet my mama, if she knew you, she would think you were the best dog ever. Winn-Dixie was smiling up at me, and I was smiling down at him, so neither one of us was looking where we were going. We almost bumped into Sweetie Pie Thomas. She was standing there sucking on her knuckle of a third finger, staring in the window of Gertrude's Pets. She took her finger out of her mouth, and she looked at me. Her eyes were all big and round. Was that bird singing on that dog's head? She asked. And she had her hair all up in a big ponytail and a big pink ribbon. But it wasn't much of a ponytail. It was mostly a ribbon and a few strands of hair. Yes, I told her. I seen it, she said. And she nodded her head and put her knuckle back in her mouth. Then she took it out again real quick. I seen that dog in church. He was catching a mouse, and I want a dog just like her. But my mama won't let me get it. No dog. She said if I'm really good, I might buy a goldfish or some gerbils. But that's what she says. But can I pet your dog? Sure, I told her. Sweetie Pie stroked Winn-Dixie in so long that his eyes half drooped closed and drool started coming out of the side of his mouth. I'm going to be 6 years old on September. I got to stop sucking my knuckle then, when I'm 6, said Sweetie Pie. I'm having a party too. Do you want to come to my party? The theme is pink. Sure, I told her. Can this dog come too? She asked. You bet, I told her. All of a sudden, I felt happy. I had a dog. I had a job. I had Miss Franny Block for a friend. And I had the first invitation to a party at Naomi. It didn't matter that it was from a 5-year-old and party wasn't until September. But I didn't feel so lonely anymore.